Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of What the Ref, the podcast where we describe everybody's favourite research excellence framework. My name is Gemma.
I'm Simon.
And I'm Lyndsey.
And today we're asking, what the ref is happening in this sector? Simon, you have some news?
Yes, there was a really interesting article in Times Higher with an excellent title. Ref's experiment with research culture was always doomed, which I thought was quite exciting. That drew me in, certainly. And it's looking into basically what happened with the pilot of the PCE, which was the people, culture and environment work at that time, which has now been changed into SPREE, as we've talked about previously. And it's got this concept basically that research culture is relational and lived, not procedural and measurable, right? So basically it's this thing that, you can't measure research culture. This is a 72% research culture, and this one is a 90% research culture. And I understand that, and I'm really behind that sort of way of thinking, but I always kind of worry with these things that basically, like, if we go too much into that argument about research culture can't be measured, how do we ensure that people still keep caring about it? And then because we know there's good research culture and there's bad research culture. Maybe we can't make that distinction, to 3 decimal places, but we need to understand it so that we can shift things in the right direction. I don't know. You're more of an expert, Gemma, than I am on this sort of stuff. what do you think?
I just feel like it's beating a dead horse. So great, thanks for that. But also, we were having these discussions 2 years ago. The point was not to measure it. It was never about measuring research culture. It was, and we talked about it even on this podcast, that when somebody says, "I'm going to make sure I have the best research culture ever," you're missing the point. It wasn't about comparison. It wasn't about like putting it down to a number with 3 decimal points so we could compare one institution to another. It was about getting institutions accountable for the workplaces that they use to provide research, with the idea that better workplaces create better research. It wasn't about comparing anybody. The ref is not about comparing institutions. It's about looking at how institutions define themselves and judging them on those. So in that way, comparison between institutions is never the objective. But the other thing, it was the same reason that we set up the hidden ref in the first place. If someone said, well, we can't evaluate NTOs and we've never done it before. And so we went, well, watch us. And we did. And again, it's not about measuring, but even before you even try to assess it, saying that it's doomed before it's assessing, let alone saying it's doomed after we've moved on from culture and now we're environment, which, we've also realized there's very small differences about it, is perhaps, not the most task-orientated problem-solving approach, which perhaps is, very, very dominant in this research culture. But I think that, thanks for that information. We've already moved on. Let's go.
I didn't want to wail on them. I thought it was a good article. I thought it was really an interesting article. But I'm always worried that some people will just read that headline and then just be kind of like, right, well, that means we can't do it. And, just forget all about culture.
But they've got the different idea about ref. They've got the different idea about ref. Ref is not about measuring and comparison. It is about accountability, and it is about responsibility. And if you move away from, we're going to have somehow get to predict the scores and replace the entire process by a machine and AI, another point for another time.
Okay. Yeah.
You got to get away this idea that it's somehow this factor that we can determine before we've even put the submission in. The evaluation is a valuation exercise, not evaluation exercise, but exercise in valorization. And with that, you move around the idea that, it wasn't always doomed, but what was doomed is a sector that thought that we had to measure it in the first place.
Yeah, maybe it's a hard thing to measure, but I don't know if you guys remember back in January, our first community call that we had was actually around people talking about research culture, how it felt, and all that kind of thing. And we heard from 50 plus people about how it's recognition and that research culture that affects the careers of progression, job security, and then the fact that some institutions are doing it really well, some of them not so much, and it's just uneven. And it affects people's lives.
Exactly.
I think we still care about it, even if it's hard to measure it.
Yeah, stop trying to isolate it as this thing. because it might not be measurable, it might not be isolatable by a particular metric, but every single person in this research sector feels it on a daily basis, and that should be the focus and the loci of the evaluation, not a metric pie in the sky. And I thought we'd moved on from that. So,
but I think we have. I think here we're talking about how people in universities interpreted that, part of ref culture and measurement and stuff, rather than these actual authors. I do want to defend them, but you've dropped directly into one of your favorite topics there, Gemma, as you dropped in the AI thing. So you've seen something on AI that I think was really interesting too. So could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'm referring to the report saying making the most of Britain's AI for science strategy, which was done by a think tank that's relatively new to the sector, but has been quite noisy. The lead author has been an advisor for UK Labour in the past, so has an interesting way in with these ideas. I thought that there were many different ways in which AI could be used in research, and I'm not arguing about drug development or pathogen identification, but there was a section on meta-science and research culture. So even, in these very difficult times, they were talking about research culture, and they were talking about, yes, AI can be used to fix or address, if you want to talk political language, some of the biggest, challenges and problems facing research culture. And then it went through the challenges, and they weren't the challenges and difficulties that I think face UK research culture, huge disparities, lack of security in research careers, integrity in leadership and transparent decision making on the university level. Not only to say how to evaluate, the diverse outputs that come from research, whether they're, in a traditional journal article or in a not so traditional, exhibition or software, but they identified, it talks about reproducibility, and they talked about funding allocations, and these are problems. But I disagree that these are the most difficult or challenging problems, and the most difficulty and challenging problems facing research in the UK today need human responses, because it was humans that made the mess, so we can't rely on AI to fix it up. But they don't address that problem. So I had some issues with that report.
So what were they getting at ultimately? Because we've all seen all of these policies and these reports and articles where it's like AI is the answer, and you kind of feel like maybe we need to take a step back and just take our time before we start implementing AI to review bid submissions, review ref submissions, and things like that.
Yeah, so I think it's related to what we were saying about culture, is the fact that they think that measuring the act of valorizing something, the act of evaluating stuff, is to reduce it to some sort of indicators that give people security of a score at the end. And that is not what the ref is about. It's never been about that. And so they talk about AI as the great big answer for increasing efficiency in the research sector. And that may be the case, but the act of valorization is inefficient and messy for a reason. And if we were going to reduce it down to metrics about how we're going to valorize, an NTO and how we're going to valorize culture, then we could replace it by AI. But that's not what the act of evaluating is all about. And so when you think about and you discard the fact that the act of evaluating is not sorting things manually into categories that you can, tell people about before. That's not what the criterion is, or the guidelines are. It's the appreciation of a wider variety and the ability to fit in characteristics of an output or an organization that don't fit the criterion through rationales and reasonable adjustments. Once you get moved past that, you start thinking AI doesn't have a role here. And I think that's why they think AI has role. They're high up on efficiency, and they think it's a tick box exercise, but it's a much more difficult and human process than that.
Yeah.
What do you like? Do you want to be taken over by computers? Sorry.
I'm sure Lyndsey wants to be taken over by computers. It means you could.
There's no possibility.
If your role is taken over by AI, then you could just put your feet up, enjoy the monthly paycheck and not have to do anything at all.
Sounds ideal. I don't know, I can't help wondering, I'm going on more kind of jokey thing of Gemma asking a large language model which heuristics it used to make the assessment.
No, to justify it and rationalize it. And I go, nah, I don't believe you. And then they just go, I don't understand the question. Please repeat it again.
So you're bringing down AI from the inside now, are you, Gemma? Okay.
It's more like, let's ask them, how do they feel about it? And perhaps we'll see about whether that's possible.
So I think we have to address this in a future podcast at some point. I think we need to do something using AI. And we were talking at one stage, well, let's redo all the 2021 evaluations by just feeding them into an LLM and see what happens.
Oh, people have done that already.
Have they?
People have done that already. Yeah.
And what happened?
Oh, they found, this is the funny thing, is so studies usually feed them into an LLM and they said that we received the same outcomes as humans did. And it's like, yeah, because humans use, within this degree of probability, fine. And yeah, sure, because humans use some of the metrics that AI uses in order to, predict or to justify it, and they do it humanly. The difference is that when a human does it, it's done for political reasons. It's done as a way of communicating back to the sector about what's acceptable or not fitting it into a category, which is what a large language model would normally do. So really what those studies are doing are confounding the AI output with actually what the heuristics are used by humans. They're just employed different ways. I think, how would a university in this sector, in this situation, respond to the idea that the amount of money that they're going to get from the ref is actually determined by a machine before they've even put a submission forward? I don't know how that will go down, but I mean, these are important questions because it's about trust in the sector. And regardless of the advances in AI, and it might be different in 5 to 10 years' time, I might be in a robot in 5 to 10 years' time, is the fact that there's a lot of trust in the sector that it is necessary for humans to have an outcome, because we can't hold a computer responsible if they get it wrong, but we can hold a human one. What are we going to do? What ref are we going to talk about if the ref was done by a computer? We'd just call it the system. Oh, we already do.
I've said it before. The ref submissions could be written by AI, judged by AI, then the work could be done by AI, and then everybody else goes to the beach. So I think that's the utopian ideal I've always strove for in my entire life.
I'm happy with that. Are you happy?
No, of course not. I mean, no, that'd be terrible, right? I don't want machines making decisions for me. No. Especially when you don't understand the logic about why they're making those decisions. But I think
we do want to go to the beach.
I do want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach rather than going to the office. Yes, that's just a basic human desire. But anyway, I think we're going far too far down the AI line here. Should we talk about one of the things that came up at NTO workshops? That I thought was really interesting. I'm really interested. Would love your take on this, Gemma, because we've seen recently, we've been running these NTO workshops. They're not traditionally submitted output workshops. Go to a university, you say, well, one of the reasons that the assessment is so difficult around NTOs is that we don't really have anything to go from. So we give them NTOs and we get them talking about it and trying to understand, how they do the assessment, picking up the heuristics that you talk about, Gemma. But also, I think just seeing, just saying there are these things you can submit, right? And there are issues around it, but it's possible. Is a really important part of our work at the moment. One of the things that comes back is, when people have been looking at a piece of software or an exhibition or a patent or whatever, they've gone, well, all I've got to go on here is a link, sometimes to something, sometimes no link, and then only 300 words. And there's a lot of politics and folklore potentially around those 300 words and what you're allowed to put into it and what you're not allowed to put into it. We've seen, some university guidance we've seen has said basically you're not allowed to use the 300 words to further detail the significance and the novelty and the rigor of an output. And other ones are saying that you should use it in that way, and huge amount of ambiguity. So I thought it'd be interesting just to have a discussion about, in a perfect world, how would we like to see NTOs submitted, and what information would we like to see going alongside the submission itself?
I think that it's a bit like the Wild Wild West, and I think we're only seeing a part of the situation. So if you go on to the REF submissions website and you see the 300 words, and yes, you're right, within those 300 words, there's links. So, if it is a composition, for example, there's a link to the piece of music or some sort of that's hosting the website. If it's a database, there's a link to the database. If it's a website, there's a link to the website. And this is in addition to the 300 words that they do provide there about significance and reach. Within those 300 words, there's a huge amount of variation. Some people talk about citations and visits and get numbers, and some people don't. It's more narrative based. And you see huge variation. What we don't see is the supplementary information that's probably put together for a portfolio. And the problem with that is that people who are submitting NTOs for the first time are going, how do I put a portfolio together? Let's see what was done last time. And they go to the website and they see that, the 300 words only. And so they're not 100% clear how they're supposed to construct their 300 words because there's so much variation in previous examples. But also they don't see that there are supplementary pieces of information. They're certainly not referenced in the 300 words that we see on the ref guidelines. So they might think that that's the only way to do it. But because the guidance for Ref 2029 has not been released yet, but the guidance is not necessarily so clear, there is a need for more clear, pointed fostering of what goes into those 300 words and the rules about whether you put supplementary information in or not. Otherwise, you're just opening the doors to game playing. We know from reports we've had at the NTO workshops that some people put reams and reams of supplementary information in addition to the 300 words. And they do it because the system allows it, even though the rules are not necessarily clear about whether they can or not. So I think there's a real need for clarity on what goes into those portfolios, which can only come from the ref, and also what goes into those 300 words, and so that people can prepare for Ref 2029. There's a huge amount of noise in the sector at the moment. People are talking about NTOs. The fact that we've had so many institutions ask us to run NTO workshops that we've, over-delivered already on what we were planning to do in a 3-year period, let alone a 1-year period. It's been amazing results and they're being received so well. There's a huge appetite within that. For recognizing NTOs. So we just need to make sure that we're very, very clear on how they're going to be recognized in a ref submission and what information is necessary. And I'm not talking the heuristics. I'm just talking what documents, how long the documents are, how many words. We have that in impact case studies. We know they have to be 4 pages. We have it for the ref environment statements, PCE or SPRE or whatever you want to call it. It could change between now and Ref 2029. I mean, let's be serious. We know that, institutions with this number of people have this number of words to do it, and they're very strict. We're just asking for the same clarity around NTO portfolio submissions because at the moment there is none, and it's a wild, wild west.
And I think, and it's not just the portfolios. It's like you can actually submit an output. I was really surprised. I mean, this is the guidance from the last ref, not from the current ref, as you say, which we don't have yet. But on Annex K, the one that we always talk about, the famous Annex K that has the list of the type of NTOs that they're expecting, and TOs, they have this bit underneath, and it's like one of those kind of little asterisk bits of the guidance where it says, for non-text outputs, practice-based outputs, or any other output where the research dimensions are not evident, and then blah, 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 a written description of the research process and all content should be provided. And then it later on says, specifically, only when necessary, but doesn't give you any understanding of how you argue what is necessary or not. You can put in a fuller written description of the research process, and you can submit it as a PDF or on paper if you wish, which I thought was really quite nice. I mean, I like the idea of putting it in a little manila envelope and sending it off to the ref. So there is actually the facility to write, and there's no limit on what they say you can put there. So, I mean, I imagine they'd be upset if you would send in a couple of books worth of evidence alongside a database or whatever. But there was the facility to add that stuff. And one thing I don't know, I really want to find out, is how much was that actually done during the last ref? It'd be really interesting. So we need to do some more digging through the ref results.
I think what's really interesting there, and what you were saying about, is in a sector that's reaching out for clarity so much that they're considering AI to analyze everything because they somehow think that gives them more certainty than the ref's normal process. Debatable for another thing. I think that there is real appetite for clarity around that. what goes into a submission, what doesn't go into submission. And also, I mean, you didn't even start talking about the other category. There is an other category in Annex K. Can I just say Annex K sounds like something else, by the way? But Annex K, there is no clarity there. There's an other category. And yet when we looked into the other clarity, we were like, hang on, this is an exhibition or this is software. But they chose to put it in into other category for a reason. What was that reason? And what are the capabilities around the other category that people didn't feel that they could put or that they could fulfill in, a category of non-traditional output that was perhaps more honest,
I don't know. Annex K makes me feel like I'm back at school again. It's like, geography's in Annex K, and it's miles away. But I'm not entirely sure. So, Lyndsey, how do you think? How you've experienced a couple of the NTO workshops now? How have you find this?
No, just one actually.
Just one.
No, I was thinking about the fact. So I've been in Hidden Ref for 3 years, and I feel like any activity that I've either ran or went to or been involved in, I literally just hear the same thing from everyone about the fact that we don't know what we're putting in to our NTO submission because, it's a link, it's a data set, it's a software, yada, yada. And then there's the 300 words. And we're having to tell you what the research question is and the references and all the things that are naturally in a publication. They're needing to try and fit that into 300 words. Never once have I heard a person say that's fine. We can submit this PDF of a full description because this is an non-textual output. That when I seen your notes earlier, Simon, that was the first time that I'd seen that was a thing that you could put. And we are asked at the community calls, at the NTO workshops, we don't know what to put in. And then we're asking people at the NTO workshops, actually, we get them into little groups, they sit down, we ask them to assess 4 of the non-traditionally submitted outputs at Ref, ask them to assess them. And then when we get feedback from people, they're finding it really hard to assess them because they do not have enough information. So what we've seen is that people are not using that kind of supplementary information PDF that they're allowed to put on.
So there's 2 questions here, what they submit and what's assessed, and whether it is enough information within that, framework of what's allowed and what's not allowed, even though that's not clear, for the evaluators to feel like they're evaluating it robustly and against the criterion. Because we do say that, the established criterion don't necessarily fit so well with non-traditional outputs, and that might be the case. But obviously the lead-on information is, if they had been provided with different information or information in a different form, would they be able to do it, yes or no? And that's what we're trying to work in here as well as at the Hidden Ref.
Well, are you finding that as well, Simon, that when we're asking people to, in fact, the first thing that we do at an NTO workshop is ask people, what NTOs are you involved in? What do you know? How do you assess them? All that kind of thing. And people basically come back and say, well, how are Ref assessing these outputs? And then we just have that answer like, oh, we don't know. Or each panel is working out during their calibration exercise. Like they have these same questions. They're not sure what to put in because they don't know what the assessors are actually looking for.
They want certainty, because every decision to put a submission in, even if it's a traditionally submitted article, is a decision of risk assessment and how risky it is to put this one forward. What is the certainty that this will give us 3 or 4 star? Because those are the ones that translate to funding back. And so, if there's less certainty, there's more risk. If there's more risk, there's less trust in the system, which is what we're trying to do. But, these ambiguities about what information is going to be submitted and in what form and how much are, contributors to that. And we definitely need some clarity around that.
I think so. It always feels a bit bad at NTO workshops when people say, so what criteria are they using? And you say, well, we don't actually know. The guidance isn't out yet. And then the ref panels have to sit down and they have to understand that. And then they generate it per panel for them, for how their panels are going to work. So at the moment, we don't know. But you have to sort out your submissions, so we want you to think about it. So we're always trying to turn it around and go, we're not the experts here. We don't know what the ref panels will do, and we don't have any control over that. But what we can do is get you talking about your NTOs, how you would assess them, and then at least you'll be able to, when the time comes, have a better understanding of what you see as good and bad, and hopefully that will align with what the ref sees as good and bad. But yeah, it always feels like it feels like you're making an excuse, but it is the situation that we are in. What about this thing about portfolios then? I thought we've had quite a few chats about portfolios at different NTO workshops where people have said, maybe this is the solution to one problem with NTOs, which is, if you submit, and I always fall back in software because it's the thing I know. But anyways, software. If you submit software, how do you show that it is novel, significant, and rigorous? And you could do that potentially by submitting it as a portfolio submission. So you've got the software, but you also back that up with whatever we're going to do around explaining why it's so novel and significant and rigorous. I don't know why, but every single time I have to say novel, significant, and rigorous. There must be some shortcut for saying that. But
an acronym. Novel, significant, rigorous. NRS.
NRS.
Or SRN.
Isn't that the National Rifle Society or something? I'm not sure.
Where's originality? Significance, originality, and rigor. SOAR.
Why is it so sore? Yeah, okay.
Or Ross. No, SOAR's better.
SOAR's good. Okay, so SOAR, right?
SOAR.
We don't need another acronym that we're going to have to
SOAR
every single time.
I just think SOAR means like a weeping sore where someone's inflicted like pain on you or some sort of like injury, or soar as in fly because they are excellent. Yes. And so this is why it's a really good acronym.
It needs to be positive. I don't know, it's even NTO used to be non-traditional. I can't even remember what it was, non-traditional outputs. You'll see my eyes dart up to that side of my brain trying to work out it's not traditionally submitted outputs. You don't need another acronym, stop it.
Okay. So how they're evaluated. Portfolios would give you that space and the ability to bring in other written evidence and things to sort of put it together. I don't know. It seems like it's certainly of interest. But again, we don't know how many were submitted last time. There's no guidance on what is a good one, and no understanding of whether they actually did the job and actually helped convince panelists that these outputs were good. I don't think so.
I think they're more appropriate for some NTOs and not others. I'm not really sure which ones. I could see that exhibitions might require like a portfolio or performance and things like that. Yeah. You're the one who could speak on software, so I don't know. But from my outsider's perspective for software, it would seem less appropriate. So how would you envisage that working, if at all?
Well, I think you could have, some information about, the community that are affected and the kind of extra research that the software had delivered on, and then that would be your sort of significance, basically. The novelty aspect, it's quite difficult to kind of explain what novel means in a software world. When obviously if something's entirely new, then it's novel, but that doesn't mean the concepts and the programming concepts behind it and stuff are novel. So there'd be some argument around that. Rigor, that would be really difficult. So I think I'll probably. Yeah, but
I always think a portfolio is like a plastic folder full of stuff, or like. Is that what we're there? So
I think so.
Yeah, but
what you're describing would not be enough to fill a folder. So
I think you could expand. You could expand on that quite a lot so you could go into, for rigor, you could go into, the software engineering concepts that have been supported by it, the way that the software was put together, and the number of people who are involved, and sort of their.
Do you know what you've just done there, though, Simon? Do you know what you've just done there?
Just written an impact case study?
No, you've just put it into categories. Tick, 30 people, tick. That's not what evaluators find useful. They're part of exclusion criteria and inclusion criteria. They're not necessarily valorization criteria. So I think this just highlights how difficult it's going to be.
It does.
I think it would be worth having a look into previous refs to see what was submitted as portfolios, and then we just get our head around what else could this be used for. Because I think if you started talking about this more recently because you were with the creatives, we kind of got creative practice research rather than
I've been in this strange world of being a STEM person around creatives. Yeah, no, they let me in, and but no, I found it really exciting.
And they let you out, Simon. They let you out.
would be worse if they hadn't let me leave. I think that would be much, much worse. But it was really interesting. And I've just had a few just brilliant chats with people around this work. And it's just, I don't know, it's nice getting that different perspective on things, especially, because it makes you think well, would this be possible in the world that I come from? So I think,
is it possible in the world that you come from, Simon? I'm really genuinely, interested. There shouldn't be one rule. It's got to be, taken into account the natural way that this NTO exists, or is it some sort of recreation with retrospective indicators that are associated with esteem? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But I think it needs to remain open and suitable for the outcome itself, for the output itself. So we'll see. Watch this space, I guess.
So thank you everyone for joining another episode of What the Ref. Something we didn't address earlier was thank you, Gemma, for returning, because we have heard from a couple of little birdies that people missed you and asked where you've been. Gemma is back. Hopefully she won't take such a long hiatus next time. So thank you both for having us all on. And for you guys, if you have any questions for us or some ideas for this podcast, then please email us at wtref@hidden-ref.org. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.